My trade, if you like, is a strategic designer. Originally, actually more like an interaction designer or service designer, so doing sort of digital product and service design. But I've always had an interest also in cities. My master's was in urban sociology, and so at some point it became possible to combine this interest in cities and spaces and places with my experience in, I guess, design and technology in one way or another. And when you get to a certain age, that also means you start engaging with the organization or the strategy around whatever it is you're designing, whether it's a place or a space or a phone or a website or an organization, that kind of thing. So ultimately, I'm a designer, and the object of the work that I do can be lots of different things depending on context. But ultimately, I'm usually zooming from the details of interactions and services and things up to the context, what I call the dark matter of organization or strategy or vision or regulation or cultural context, that kind of stuff. I'm a leader or a manager, I guess, and I have been for quite a long time now, since I suppose the early 2000s when I was at the BBC and I was running big teams, software engineers and interaction designers and things like that. I guess when I was CEO of Fabrica as well, that's done a lot of work thinking about the environments that the team works within. So perhaps because I'm a designer and a leader, this sense that almost everything is connected, which is sometimes overwhelming, but fascinating, is kind of the way that I approach that leadership. So the relationship between the strategy and the people and the space and the tools and the way we present ourselves in public and the way we work in private, all of those things are really, I see as the kind of material of leadership in that sense. So the other thing that I guess I then do is I do work a lot sort of at a leadership level, as in my clients are working at that level, or my contacts or collaborators are. So I'm often working in their leadership context as well and trying to help them figure out what that might be with my team, and using design as part of that, and the particular skills design has around making things tangible and integrating things and dealing with stewardship and also ambiguity and all of these things. That's often a lot of what we're doing, is helping our client figure out how to effectively lead their own enterprise in that way. Your average city council is largely in a shape that someone from the 19th century would recognize. Maybe 20th century if we're being charitable, but really not in the right shape to address 21st century problems or opportunities. So yes, there's absolutely no doubt, I think, that the leadership context is not framed appropriately for the 21st century. And then some of the skills that go along with that, or the culture of that, also is problematic. So particularly understanding how to, say in a public context, make policy, which is kind of leadership, very direct kind of leadership. The policy making tools and environment is really from another age. Whether that's the way that you understand the problem or opportunity in the first place and then conceptualize a solution and then work that through to something you could deliver, and then even how you might measure or value it. All of those things are usually working in a very kind of perhaps late 20th century context at best. So usually policy making only has economic tools to hand when it's evaluating success of things, and usually really basic ones as well, like cost-benefit analysis. They don't really have any understanding of public value, for instance. The practice has no understanding of user-centered approaches or prototyping or iteration, stewardship, things like that, which we know works well in many other contexts. And then, again, the form itself, how people relate to each other, is still very kind of siloed and vertical and discipline-based in an old sense, that isn't terribly helpful for the 21st. I think you could equally say there's massive issues with the way that the private sector is undergoing leadership as well, whether it's our current bête noire of tech entrepreneurs who clearly are optimized to do some things very well in the 21st century, but are laying waste to tons of things around them. So you'd argue, when you look at the balance sheet, if you like, sorry to use an economics term, that's not appropriate leadership often. So in terms of how I'd interpret that word, it describes a kind of a stance or an approach to understanding a situation or context or people or place. And as I just said before, I suppose it feels like the way that our leaders are trained and also encouraged to be through media or thought leadership. We don't have the kind of subtlety and focus on practice that we need for the 21st century challenges. I think that the mindset is quite an interesting kind of lasso around a bunch of things, which includes training and practice and positioning and stance and your role within an organization. But it doesn't feel appropriately tuned for what we're dealing with now. One thing about being a designer or having a designerly approach to things, I guess. I always remember the book by Chip Kidd called The Cheese Monkeys, which is a book about graphic design, but it's a novel, and at some point in the novel, teacher says to one of the kids, as a designer, you've got to eat the world with your eyes. And it's that sense of kind of everything is going in all the time. So everything you see around you, because you tend to see in this very integrated, holistic way, is effectively kind of grist to the mill. It's part of the sort of an everyday ongoing research. And it's not specific research, it's not kind of focused research to address a particular problem. That's a quite different thing, obviously, and then something you do professionally. But I do think there's something about this kind of blurred personal private approach which is interesting, because it just again means that you're hyper aware, hyper sensitized to the way that systems are playing out in everyday life, particularly I suppose if you work to do with cities, which mine is, and you spend a lot of time in them, then you're going to be basically seeing those systems at work all the time. It's difficult not to think about that, even if it's the weekend or you're with your kids or your wife or in the pub or whatever. This is very, very blurred, and sometimes that's unhealthy, as in it's sometimes difficult to switch off, and I'm as bad at that as anybody, I guess, and well, maybe not as bad as anybody. I do take active measures around those sort of things. I'm massively interested in designing for focus and well-being. That's one of our current projects. However, I think the particular kind of practice I've chosen, which is a designer and then one who does a lot of writing, means that you're inevitably engaged with all of those subjects every single moment, one way or another. I think one of the things that's interesting now is how organizational forms are increasingly networked and blurred, and that has a different effect on leadership. So what's interesting now is beginning to see how people are shifting, and have been for some time, through multiple careers, never mind through multiple jobs, switching careers several times during their lifetime, having elongated lifetimes, working in many, many different ways, having kind of portfolio careers where you're doing several things simultaneously. I can see that even within my team, there are some who have an art practice that they do 2 days a week and then 3 days a week with me, or and might teach 1 day a week and do 4 days a week with me. So that's hard if you're trying to work in a traditional 20th century organizational way. So I'm interested in how do we flex in that direction. Equally, more radically, I suppose, then you see networked organizations springing up on demand to address particular kind of projects. So a team of 7 emerges to focus on this thing, and they can be designed, if you like, bespoke for that project. And then it disbands and you pull 3 together to do something else, or 12 to do that. That's really interesting, and the challenge again to the way organizations work, so like contracts and all of that messy detail works, liability, all of those things. So it may work better in some areas than others, but it's certainly happening, I think, in most sectors. It actually has a big impact on education as well, of course, which education for design leadership is pretty woeful, I think. That's one thing that general design education suffers from, is not giving people enough of an understanding of the work that they're going into and the context of that work. So that would absolutely apply at the design leadership educational level as well. Not only profoundly useful, but profoundly important to pull design into new contexts, and particularly I think the context of public decision-making, public practice, that kind of area, because it's been woefully without design for a long time. And it's not that design will single-handedly save it or anything. It connects any one tool of a, has to be a diverse toolkit. But nonetheless, the impact a designer could have around these kind of big questions that the 21st century brings in the context of public practice and policy making, governance or city making or health or any one of those sectors, that is profoundly valuable, I think. I'll say hello to Marius for me. I haven't seen him for a few months.
He'll be marking this submission, so I'll include that bit.
Yeah, exactly. So Dan says hi. All right.